Made with Spoken. No Hour to Spare, a Havoc in Wyoming short story by Millie Copper. Digital narration performed by Billy Oxley. The lentils were almost gone. Frank already knew that before he checked, but he checked anyway, the same way he checked every morning. Lentils for 2, maybe 3 meals. Rice 4 days maybe. Ghee only enough to scrape out of the tin. He'd stopped keeping track of the chickpeas because there weren't enough to count. He put everything back and stood in the small, dark room. Lord, please. That was the whole prayer. He didn't have more than that this morning. Leela would have the tea going. Gloria would be with her. He straightened up and went to join them. He'd been a high school history teacher in Wesley, Wyoming until he retired, and they came here. Things had been good, challenging, but good. Both he and Gloria recognized they were making a difference and considered it worth being away from their daughter. Now, he shook his head. Leela handed him a cup of tea when he came to the kitchen doorway. Chipped cup, no sugar, a little milk. She'd found a woman 2 streets over who kept a water buffalo. Leela had found something useful in each neighborhood they'd lived in. Frank had stopped being surprised by it. This was their 3rd place since the collapse. Back when things were normal, they lived in a modern yet modest home near the church. The 3 mission houses were in the same neighborhood. 12 widows between the 3 homes. Frank and Gloria moved between the houses, doing what they could to help each of them. When they had to vacate their home after a neighborhood dispute, they moved into one of the homes with 4 of the widows. Leela had been timid and shy back then, newly widowed and cast out. But she loved the Lord. She and her husband had both accepted Christ before he died. Gloria took her under her wing, and even Gloria marveled at the woman Leela had become, considering their circumstances. With the troubles, the other houses had to empty, too. Frank didn't know where the women had gone. Another woman who had lived with them disappeared one night. They'd been doing okay, keeping to themselves and working together to survive. His wife met his gaze. "You're worrying." Frank shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. "That doesn't sound like something I'd do." Gloria smiled while Leela snickered. Worry was a common pastime in the world they found themselves, but action was more important. He worked hard to keep the worry tamped down. There was enough to do each day. Frank sipped his pudina tea, the heavy mint biting at his tongue. It dulled the edge of his hunger, or at least that was what he tried to believe. For months now, breakfast and dinner had been nothing more than tea with a splash of milk. They still managed a hot meal at midday, but unless one of them found more supplies soon, even that would be gone. The rations would shrink again. He glanced at his wife. When they arrived in India, Gloria had soft curves and thick, beautiful hair. Now she was all bones and sharp angles, her hair thinning enough that she kept it covered with a scarf. Frank had wanted her to see a doctor, but finding one willing to treat them had proved impossible. Around Christmas, when their pastor stopped by, he mentioned others who had lost their hair from malnutrition. Frank prayed that was all that was wrong with his wife. Malnutrition, as if slowly starving to death wasn't bad enough. "Hot today," Gloria said, wiping the hollow at the base of her neck with a hanky. "Every day," Leela replied. Gloria smiled a little. "One of these days I'll comment on the weather and it will be something other than hot." "Not today." "No, definitely not today." Tulsi shuffled in, white sari, slightly crooked, face set in its usual arrangement. Frank had spent a long time deciding whether that expression was disapproval or just her face. He'd finally settled on just her face. He knew little about her, having never had an actual conversation. Leela said Tulsi was in her 70s and had been living on the streets for close to 20 years, after her husband's family decided she was no longer their concern. Frank believed her face had earned whatever it had settled into. She lowered herself onto her mat without a word to anyone. "Good morning, Tulsi," Frank said in Hindi. She looked at him. Then she looked away, which, from Tulsi, was practically a warm greeting. "Good morning," Gloria tried. Leela knelt beside Tulsi and spoke softly as she pressed a cup of tea into her hands. Tulsi gave a faint nod in return. Frank caught Gloria's eye. She pressed her lips together. Tulsi had joined them after the trouble began. She was not a Christian like the others, at least not as far as anyone knew. Leela had found her scavenging, surviving on the streets, and brought her back with her. Tulsi was not pleasant, but she worked alongside the rest without complaint. Society rejected widows. People believed they brought bad luck, and even now some individuals avoid them, preferring not to cross their path on the street. "Shanti?" Frank asked, keeping his voice low so only Gloria could hear. His wife pulled her mouth tight. "Not well. Leela took her some tea, and the rice left from last night." Shanti was the oldest in their house, the oldest widow in what used to make up their mission. At 91, Shanti had been a widow for over 25 years. She had lived in a widow's ashram in a pilgrimage city, but after she became a Christian, she was no longer welcome there. They all sacrificed more to provide Shanti as much comfort as possible. As it was, she rarely moved from her room. Simran appeared from the back, ready for the day. Like Leela, Simran found things that helped them survive. He had little doubt that without the two of them, he and Gloria would be struggling more than they were. They had their tea and milk, Gloria speaking with Simran and Leela in English, practicing as if sometime they might have an opportunity to go to America. As if America still existed. Frank wasn't sure it actually did. His mind drifted as he listened to the carefully curated conversation. Some things remained unspoken. Food, family, the way things had changed so drastically. Frank closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. "Don't think about Wyoming," he told himself. "Don't do that." The thoughts flooded him anyway. Not Wyoming, the place, but Laurie, his daughter. There were few times when he didn't think of her. He and Gloria had planned for years, waiting until he retired to go to India for what was supposed to be a year, maybe a year and a half on a missionary visa. They had financially supported Pastor Sean's church since before Laurie was born, and ministering in person made sense. They'd discussed Laurie joining them, but she wanted to stay back and finish college with a plan to be a dentist. She attended college in Laramie. They'd flown from Prospect to Denver during her spring break, spending the week at a hotel and enjoying their time together. Frank and Gloria left for India from there. Laurie took them to the airport. "We'll be home before you know it," he'd promised. That was over 2 years ago, and, at the moment, he did not know how they would ever return to Wyoming. The memory of his last glimpse of his daughter still brought tears to his eyes. "Laurie's fine," he thought. She'd been back in Wesley for the summer when things fell apart there. She was staying at Aaron's parents' house. The family was away, visiting their oldest daughter and her family for a long-planned reunion. Laurie and her fiancé Aaron remained in Wesley. Fiancé wasn't quite right. Aaron had asked Gloria and Frank for permission to marry their daughter, but had insisted it would not happen until they returned from India. Now, Frank hoped they decided not to wait. He hoped they were making their life together and were safe. Of course they were safe. Wesley was safe. It had to be. He chose to believe that. He'd been choosing it since last June when the phone stopped working, and he would not stop. After tea, he went to the doorway and looked into the lane. The city was already noisy, a different kind of noisy than before the collapse, less commerce, more friction. Men standing in clusters, watching, looking for something. Frank hated to think exactly what. This had been a quiet neighborhood, better than the last one, which they had been forced to flee in the middle of the night. That was months ago, September, when Gloria still had hair and Shanti was able to leave her mat, before Leela brought Tulsi to live with them. But in the last few weeks things had been changing. Tulsi said it was the heat. It made people do the things they wouldn't normally do, and it was going to get worse. They were in the middle of April now, according to the handwritten calendar Gloria and the women kept. It was hot. But May would be worse. He knew it was true. They'd been here last year at this time, but things were different last year. Things were normal, and their place had air conditioning. Now there was no air conditioning. They hadn't even had electricity in months. When America fell apart, it only took a short amount of time for India, for the rest of the world, to follow. 3 of the men on the street had been there every morning for 2 weeks now. Frank had started to know them by their habits, The tall one who always faced the house, the younger one who spat into the lane, and an older man who didn't look at Frank directly, but watched him from the edge of his vision, which was somehow worse. The nationalist groups had been pressuring Pastor Sean for years before the U.S. fell. Now there was no outside pressure, no rule of law to push back against them. Nothing between Frank and Gloria and 4 invisible women and whatever those men decided to do. No one had touched them yet. Frank did not believe that would last. He went out back to check the cistern. That's when he smelled it. It was not a cook fire or trash burning. He turned. To the north, a column of black smoke wound into the sky. Frank couldn't see where it originated, but he knew it was close. Too close. He went inside, calling for his wife as he opened the door. She came out of the back room, the smile she wore for him faltering. "What's wrong?" "Smoke, a fire. It looks bad." "Where is it?" she asked, moving to his side. 3 streets, maybe 4. Start packing what we need. I'm going to go see if it's as bad as I fear it may be." She reached out and took his hand. "Pray with me." He nodded, taking her other hand in his. "Father God, we come to you asking you to keep us safe. Please stop the fire before it causes damage or death. We pray these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen." "Amen," Gloria whispered. "I'll be back as soon as I can, if—" She touched his face. "Hurry back. We'll be ready in case we need to leave." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "I love you." Frank went out the front door. What had been a quiet lane now bustled with people. A man with something bundled under each arm was walking fast, a woman pulling 2 children by the wrists. Another woman was looking back while the man she was with urged her forward. At the far end, where the lane curved north, the sky was wrong, orange and gray where it should have been white. The 3 men on the corner were gone. Good, Frank thought, or bad. Hard to know. No fire trucks were coming. He knew that without thinking about it. The city's emergency services had been falling apart since October, non-existent since the beginning of the year. Frank rushed down the path and into the lane, going against increasing foot traffic. He stopped an older man he recognized, asking in Hindi what was happening. A huge fire had broken out. That much Frank knew. "How close is the fire?" He gestured toward the smoke. "Too close," the man replied as he started moving again. He called over his shoulder, "You must leave. It is not safe here." Frank hesitated for a moment while his brain translated the words into English. "Thank you. Stay safe," he called after the man. With the people in the lane increasing as the seconds ticked by, Frank realized there was no reason for him to continue toward the fire. Every second they delayed would make things even more difficult. Shanti, moving her would not be easy. Leela had brought home a small handcart to help with their salvaging trips. Maybe they could put Shanti on the cart and pile their belongings around her. That might work. Inside the house, Gloria was coming from a bedroom. "The lane is busy. Everyone is evacuating. I didn't go to the source. There seemed no need." "We're almost ready." She turned and went toward the widow's room. Leela came from the kitchen with both arms around the big clay water pot. "Leela, leave it." "It's the only—" "Too heavy. Leave it." She looked at him for a second. Then she set it down. Frank followed Gloria to the doorway of the widow's room. Gloria had Shanti on her feet, both arms around her, talking in Hindi, low and steady. Shanti struggled to breathe. Tulsi was sitting on her mat with her arms folded across her chest. "Tulsi, fire, we go now." "Nahin." "Of course." Frank stepped into the room. "Tulsi." "Nehin." Flat, final. He crouched down to her level. Convincing Tulsi would not be easy, and he didn't have time to wait for her to decide on her own. From outside came a crash. Frank jumped. Tulsi didn't. "Tulsi, forgive me." He got his arms under hers and stood up. She fought him. Elbows sharp, a stream of Hindi he'd never heard before that he was fairly certain wasn't a blessing. She was lighter than he'd expected, but she didn't make it easy. He got her to her feet and moved her, half carrying through the doorway, into the main room. She had a lot to say about it. Her feet were moving, though. Good enough. Simran held the back door open as Gloria and Leela helped Shanti onto the handcart, loaded with their goods, but they saved a space for the elderly widow. The smell hit him hard. In the few minutes since he had been outside, it had already changed. Smoke, heat, and the smell of a city burning. "Tulsi," Gloria said with a nod, "we must go." Tulsi pulled herself away from Frank but kept moving toward Gloria and out the door. She stopped next to the handcart, wrapping her arms around herself as she stared at the ground. "Do we have everything?" "Everything that matters," Gloria said, nodding toward the women. His eyes met Gloria's. Fear was there, but so was determination. "Do you have a bag for me?" he asked. "Two, against the wall." Frank settled the bags across his body, one resting on each hip. Gloria wore the backpack she'd brought from Wyoming and carried a small shopping bag. Leela and Simran carried heavily laden sling bags. He trusted they'd pack the necessities. Leela stood at the front of the handcart, ready to take the handles. "I'll start," Frank said. "You carry much," she replied in halting English. "Please, Leela, Tulsi needs you." Leela nodded her agreement and moved to the side. "Will we take the lane?" Gloria asked. "The alley," Frank replied. From where they stood, he had a view of both options. The alley was less crowded than the lane, though not by much. "It'll be difficult with the cart," his wife replied. "We'll be fine." He prayed he was right. Gloria and Simran went first. Leela kept her hand on Tulsi's elbow. She'd stopped fighting and was walking on her own, jaw set, still muttering under her breath. Frank set the handcart in motion. Even with Shanti and some of their belongings on it, the weight was manageable. Smoke, low and heavy, filled the alley and moved through the passage. Shanti coughed. "Almost there," Frank said. "Where will we go?" Simran asked. "Out of the smoke and away from the fire," Gloria replied. Frank watched Leela talking softly and steadily in Hindi to Tulsi. His gaze traveled to his wife. Standing tall and setting a pace that would get them to safety, he thought, not for the first time, that Gloria was the most capable person he'd ever known, and he hadn't always been smart enough to say so. He was working on that. "You're doing great, honey," he said to her back. She didn't turn around. "I know." He almost laughed. They didn't laugh enough. It felt strange and good for the half-second it lasted. The alley connected to a wider street. People everywhere, moving fast without a destination, the way people move when something is very wrong and they haven't figured out what to do about it. Men in clusters staring at the smoke. A family stopped across the street, the father in a loud argument with someone, the mother sitting on a bundle with two small children pressed against her legs, a boy of maybe 12 running past, carrying a bird cage. An old woman sat in the middle of the foot traffic as if she'd simply sat down. Nobody looked at Frank, Gloria, or the widows. Nobody ever did. 4 Dalit widows and 2 Americans were invisible in the city on a normal day. Apparently that held in a crisis, too. "Should we cross?" Gloria asked as they stopped. "Continue down the alley on the other side." Frank set down the cart and turned to look at Shanti. She gave him a smile. "I think we should fall in," he said. "Move with them, there might be less smoke. Gloria, stay with Simran. Leela, you keep Tulsi. Let's go to that market near our old church. You know the one?" Leela nodded her agreement. "Can you handle the cart for that distance?" Gloria asked, bending to check Shanti. Shanti reached for Gloria's hand, whispering something quietly. "God will provide," Gloria replied. She looked at Frank. "I can take the cart for a bit." "I'm fine. If we get separated, we'll meet at the market." Frank met their eyes, waiting for a nod of agreement. "We won't get separated," Gloria said. "But if we do?" "We won't," she repeated. He gave a nod before looking past them to Tulsi. She stood apart, arms folded, staring back the way they'd come. He followed her gaze. The fire was visible down the alley. The fire confirmed his suggestion. They needed to join the throng and get far away from this neighborhood. "Now," Frank said, and pushed the cart forward into the street. The crowd took them immediately. Not violently, not yet, but with the indifferent pressure of too many bodies moving in the same direction, with the same urgency. Frank kept his hands on the cart handles and his eyes on Gloria's backpack ahead of him. It was the noise that surprised him, even though it shouldn't have. He'd been in crowds before, but this was a different register. The voices had a high and desperate pitch. The smoke was thicker here, stinging his eyes. Up ahead was one of the 3 men who had been lingering near their house, the youngest. He pushed a cart with a woman following close behind. They both looked scared. "Leela!" he called out, looking for her. "Here." She was at his right, one hand on Tulsi's arm. Tulsi was walking jaw forward like the fire personally offended her. Frank tried to find Gloria. He caught a glimpse of a woman in white. Maybe Simran, maybe someone else. 6 or 7 people ahead. He trusted it was them. He kept going. The surge came without warning. A knot of men burst out of a side lane, and the crowd buckled. Someone hit his left shoulder hard, and he staggered, nearly losing the cart. He got it back, got his footing, but when he looked up he couldn't find his wife or the widows. He scanned, finding nothing. Too many people, too much movement. Leela pressed in toward the cart, her arm now around Tulsi entirely. "Good," he said. "Gloria?" Leela shook her head. "We must keep moving." He told himself his wife was ahead. She had to be ahead. She'd been ahead of him, and the crowd was moving in one direction. Gloria was with Simran. She knew where they were going. He would find her there. "Hold on, Shanti." He put his head down and pushed through the crowd. The market near the old church had a covered area out front, 4 columns holding up a rusted corrugated roof. Frank had sheltered there once during a monsoon downpour, standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers while the rain turned the street into a river. They could use rain now, but instead all they had was oppressive heat. That alone could be deadly. Add in the fire, and things were desperate. The crowd thinned as they turned off the main street. Frank's arms were burning, but he kept moving. Leela guided Tulsi to one of the columns, and the old woman leaned against it, breathing hard. She said nothing. Leela spoke to her quietly, and Tulsi gave the faint, almost imperceptible nod that was the closest she came to gratitude. Shanti was asleep or something near it. Her chest rose and fell. Frank set the cart handles down and straightened to look down the street they'd come from. He waited for Gloria's face to appear in the crowd, to glimpse her backpack or the white of Simran's clothing. People moved past. A man on a bicycle threading through the foot traffic, 2 boys chasing each other for reasons that had nothing to do with the fire, or maybe everything. No Gloria, no Simran. He looked at Leela. She was already watching him, and in her expression he saw she understood the situation completely, and was waiting to see what he would do with it. "They'll come," he said. Leela nodded. He turned back to the street and stood there with his hands at his sides, watching the smoke in the distance, his eyes scanning the crowd. Gloria came around the corner with Simran a step behind her. Frank didn't hide his smile or the relief he felt when seeing her. "Stay here," he said to Leela. Gloria walked into him, and he held on. She didn't cry, neither did he. They just stood there in the street while the city moved around them. "I was hoping you'd be here," she said into his shoulder. "I'm here. I'll always be here." He didn't let go right away. She didn't either. After a while they moved to the pillar with the women and took stock. The handcart. 2 bags slung at Frank's hips. Gloria with her backpack and a small shopping bag. Leela and Simran sling bags over their shoulder. Tulsi stood against the column, arms folded, watching the street. Shanti asleep, a few loose supplies piled beside her on the cart. 6 people with only what they could carry. "Where will we go?" Simran asked. Nobody answered right away. Frank looked over the city. The smoke was still rising, pale now, against the white sky. He thought about the house they'd left behind. Was it possible the fire would spare it? He prayed it might, but deep down he knew better. He knew they'd need to find a new place. Gloria took his hand and gave it a squeeze. He squeezed back as he thought about Laurie, about the last time he'd seen her at the airport, the way she'd looked at him, like she were memorizing him. Laurie was safe at home in Wyoming, safe with Aaron. He believed that. "We'll find somewhere," Gloria said. That was all. No plan, no destination, nothing between them and whatever came next except faith in God. Frank looked at his wife, at the scarf covering her thinning hair, at the determined expression she wore. She was already looking forward, already thinking ahead. Tulsi stepped closer to Frank and Gloria. "The Lord will provide." Her voice was soft, her English broken. Gloria touched Tulsi's arm. "Yes, Tulsi. Yes, He will." This has been No Hour to Spare, a Havoc in Wyoming bonus story by Millie Copper. Produced by CU Publishing LLC and presented by Killer Cozies. Learn more about Millie Copper's books at milliecopper.com.
The end. We hope you've enjoyed this production of
No Hour to Spare, a Havoc in Wyoming short story, made with spoken.